Hi, and welcome back to my channel, Suspicious Minds. My name is Nini, and on here I love to tell you about true crime cases, whether it's been solved or unsolved. I talk about disappearances, and then that just leads to generally creepy stuff. So if that is something that you are interested, please hit the subscribe button, and then you can also choose your notifications. The case that we're going to look at today was requested by one of our British viewers, and I'm so sorry I couldn't find your name again. We did chat about the case in one of the video comments, so I hope that you're watching this. It's a case that didn't garner a lot of attention in South Africa. However, it was a very, very well-known case in not only England, but also in the rest of Europe, because it's got a lot of countries involved in the actual outcome of the case. When you told me about the case, I immediately recollected what happened, but I never knew that the criminal was actually from South Africa. So that was a very big surprise. Now, the case that I'm talking about is a case that became known in the UK for the worst acid attack ever up until that time. It was about a jilted lover, a woman who could not get her way. She just decided that if I'm not going to get my way, then this is how terrible things are going to turn out. This is the case of the South African-born Berlinah Wallace. Berlinah Madikiledi Ntimkulu was born and raised in the Sebokeng township in Gauteng in the late 1960s. She grew up in Sebokeng. She explained later that this was a very impoverished life and a very criminal-ridden environment. Berlinah showed interest in fashion from a very young age, and if you look at some of the pictures online when she was a young teenager, she would always dress herself up. She looked fashionable. Now, in a township in South Africa, and especially in the 1960s, 70s, actually even until now, it is not the safest environment to raise children. But billions of people do it, and so did Berlinah's parents. Sebokeng is a township in Gauteng's what they call the Vaal Triangle, and it's a community that is deeply rooted in their culture. There is definitely poverty, but there's also people that are hard workers, that are resilient, and that contribute to the upbuilding of their community. There's a diverse mix of languages, traditions, and people generally in a township stand together, and there's a lot of people that go to church on Sundays, and they have a proud history of where they come from. And this would be the environment that Berlinah grew up in. Education is a form or an escape for a lot of people, for their children. So education is very, very important to the general South African citizen. That was also very important to Berlinah's parents, and she always said that she wanted to become a fashion designer, so she wanted to study fashion. Now, what our viewer asked is that it would be interested to know in what kind of environment Berlinah grew up. So it would be a community environment where it takes a village to raise a child, because most of the moms would go out working. They would leave their children with caretakers. The crime statistics is important, and that is what came up in her later court case, there is crime in townships, and Berlinah testified that when she was 20 years old, she was actually assaulted by a gang of men, viciously, terribly, and sexually assaulted in Sebokeng. And it was from this that she contracted HIV. Now again, this is very important to know the status of Berlinah's HIV/AIDS, because this is a crucial point in the case of how she actually met the victim. I don't think it is as trivial as a pinch of salt, but the judge in her court case later on said that the claims of what happened to Berlinah in South Africa will be taken with caution. It's noted that she had a tragic past, but that nothing can excuse what she did. I just also want to emphasize that there are millions and actually billions of people who live in townships, who have lived there over the years, and not all of them do what Berlinah did in this case. Now, while I was researching this case, I came across most of the descriptions describing Berlinah Wallace as vindictive, a scorned lover, jealous, abusive, and controlling. And that is how she was portrayed in the media. But at the same time, her half-brother back in South Africa described her as a kind, gentle, and ambitious, incapable of hurting anyone. His words were, "She wouldn't hurt a bird." But we will quickly come to learn that Berlinah's family did not know her very well at all. In the early 1990s, Berlinah met a British man named Ray Wallace. She met him in Randburg in Johannesburg, and in 1994 she left South Africa to start a new life with him in the United Kingdom. Ray became her husband somewhere, we don't really have a timeline of that, and she took his surname. She became his partner in this new country. Her family thought she went to the UK and she was living the perfect life. Her mother said that she thought that Berlinah was a fashion designer, but the only thing we know is that Berlinah did have ambitions in fashion and she was studying fashion design, but we never know whether she actually worked as a fashion designer. We also don't know what happened with Ray and why Ray and Berlinah was no longer married. We only know that by the end of 2010, she was living in the Bristol area and she and Ray Wallace were no longer together. Remember now that Berlinah was HIV positive, and we also don't know if Ray Wallace knew this. But while being single, Berlinah joined a social media group for single people who are HIV positive. Now, this group was comprising of people all over the world, and Berlinah hoped to find somebody that could identify with what she's going through and somebody that she can also support in what they are going through. And on this group, to this poor man's family's regret, Berlinah met 21-year-old Mark van Dongen. Now, Mark and Berlinah met on the group in 2011. Mark was a Dutch civil engineer and he started studying in the UK. He moved there, and it was almost immediately when he started studying that him and Berlinah started a relationship. Berlinah was 20 years more or less older than what Mark was at that stage. Despite this age gap, the two of them had love at first sight. Their friends in the beginning said that they were very happy for the two. It seemed like they were very much in love, and they maintained a relationship for the next 5 years. After the initial honeymoon phase, it became a very, very toxic relationship. Mark gave Berlinah a lot of emotional and financial support during this relationship. They moved in together at a stage, and his friends, family, his colleagues, everybody described him as a kind-hearted and gentle person. Somebody else named him too good for this world, and he always put other people before him. But his friends and family said that Mark was deeply in love with Berlinah. But Berlinah had an enormous jealousy and control issue brewing inside of her. She had bouts of anger, and she was so volatile and possessive. In court, various other people testified towards how jealous and controlling she was. Mark's friends and colleagues said that he would tell them that Berlinah abuses him physically and that he was scared of her. They did believe him, and they did tell him to leave her, but he said that he loved her too much. In 2011, that was the first incident where Mark had called the police. It wasn't the first incident of abuse, but this was the first time when the police got involved. Berlinah poured hot, boiling water over Mark during a disagreement they had. He was sitting on the couch, and she went to the kitchen. She got whatever container she had the water boiled in, and Mark called the police. And in fear of Berlinah getting in trouble, he told them that he actually had an accident and he spilled hot tea all over himself. But later on, he did tell the friends that he lied and that he was trying to protect Berlinah because he didn't want her to be in trouble, and he didn't want people to see her in a bad light. Their relationship was a roller coaster of breaking up and getting back together, breaking up, getting back together. And the tactic that Berlinah used, because they said that every time Mark said, "I'm done, I'm not going back," the tactic was that she would threaten that she would self-harm herself if Mark would not come home. And Mark was really, really scared that Berlinah would end her own life. He even went to therapy with her. They went to counseling. She went to counseling. He moved back into the place that they shared. And in 2013, while she was going for this therapy, Berlinah said to a therapist or a counselor at a university where she went for the counseling that she was violently abusive towards her partner Mark, and that she just doesn't know how to stop it. And she's got these anger issues that she feels that she may harm him seriously. She wants to stop having those feelings. In 2014, she told a psychiatric nurse that controlling her rage was a challenge, and she said that she actually liked it when somebody is upset with her, and that she feels that she can destroy that person and everything around her when she feels like that. She described it as having an adrenaline rush to show this person how powerful she is. Now that last part's my own words, but the adrenaline rush is what she said to the psychiatric nurse. And it's so sad because nobody did anything when she admitted that she feels that she can seriously harm her partner. By 2015, the couple's on-off relationship had deteriorated so badly that Mark was now convinced that he's done. And in August 2015, he said to Berlinah, "I'm done, it's over, I am no longer in a relationship with you." Right after that, or close to that time, he started seeing another woman with the name of Violet. When Berlinah found out about Violet, the jealousy and the rage just consumed her. And in the weeks leading up to what Berlinah had done, she started harassing Mark. She followed him around, she stalked him, she sent him text messages. She found out that Violet was not HIV positive, and she threatened Mark that if he does not leave Violet, she is going to tell her about his status, and then she is going to leave him anyway because she would not want to date him, and he's going to run back to her, who is Berlinah. And she tormented Mark when she found out about his new girlfriend. She also didn't leave Violet to live a peaceful life. She made silent calls to her. They could prove that at least 14 of the calls were made by Berlinah, so she would call her, and I don't know if she would breathe into the phone, but she also tormented Violet. Mark told Violet about his violent ex-girlfriend, and Mark was receiving a lot of first. She started with, I'm going to harm myself. When she saw that Mark was not budging, she started threatening him. She threatened Violet, and she realized that she was not going to get her way. On the 2nd of September 2015, he called the police and said that I'm being threatened by my ex-girlfriend. I really feel that I am not safe. Please, I need to know what to do. The police arrived at her door. She was still living in the flat that she and Mark was living in, and he issued her a warning, the policeman, under the Protection from Harassment Act. Mark told his friends that Berlinah had scratched him. She threatened him during this period, so she would still see him. Everybody saw that this is becoming dangerous. So between August and September, when Berlinah realized that Mark is not coming back, my old tricks are not working, she went on to Amazon and she ordered a bottle of high concentration sulfuric acid for £17. She specifically searched for a liter of 98% pure acid. This is like movie stuff where they dissolve things in acid. So it wasn't something that she would be able to explain why she bought this. There's no household chore that you need this for. She had a plan with this acid. Now I want to read to you what happens when this sulfuric acid comes into contact with human flesh. I got this from Google, and they say that sulfuric acid is a highly corrosive substance, and when it comes in contact with the skin, it can cause severe chemical burns and tissue damage. The extent and severity of the damage depends on the concentration of the acid, which Berlinah had 98% pure acid, and the duration of the exposure. It can lead to pain, redness, blistering, and even deep tissue damage with potential scarring. The immediate effects when sulfuric acid makes contact with your skin is that you get a burning sensation that leads to redness, irritation, and potential blisters. Your tissue damage. The acid penetrates the skin, causing tissue death and potentially leading to third-degree burns. If not properly treated, the damage can progress, leading to scarring, impaired movement, or even permanent disfigurement. Highly concentrated sulfuric acid solutions are more dangerous and can cause more severe and rapid damage compared to diluted solutions. Sulfuric acid can cause severe eye damage, potentially leading to blindness. That is what happens when sulfuric acid, a drop, touches your skin. Now imagine what is going to happen with this poor man, with this woman having 1 liter of 98% pure sulfuric acid. After receiving this bottle from Amazon, Berlinah removed all the labeling. So all the warnings that said it causes severe burns, this is toxic, this is acid, she removed all of it. It was a bottle that had no labeling on it that was in her kitchen. She also obsessively researched acid attack cases online, and they later recovered evidence of 82 separate internet searches on a computer about sulfuric acid, its effect on victims, and legal cases. So she probably thought, okay, what can happen to me if I do this? On the 14th of September, Berlinah reads a news article about a man accused of tricking his girlfriend into drinking acid by telling her that he's bringing her a glass of water and she drank this. A story that's very similar to what she would claim in her own defense later in court. So all of these preparations made it clear that Berlinah were planning and calculating this attack on poor Mark, who did nothing wrong. He didn't cheat on her, he didn't abuse her, he was a good, loving partner for Berlinah for 5 years. On the 22nd of September, so remember she bought the bottle on the 2nd of September, so in between Mark is being harassed, Violet is being harassed, and Mark tells his friends on that day that I'm going to visit Berlinah tonight. I'm very worried about her. She's still saying she's going to end her own life. I want to go there and settle things with her. I want a peaceful farewell. I'm sure I can get her to understand. So he goes there to the flat that she was still living in. He used to stay there, and that is in a place called Westbury Park in Bristol. So Mark's friends were very concerned, and they understood Mark, and they understood he was really concerned about Berlinah. So to them it was, okay, Mark can handle this. We trust him. We know where his heart is at. He arrived at about 10 o'clock at night, and he ended up sleeping over. He stayed over and he slept in the same bed as he used to with Berlinah. Now, I mean, I can understand that. She probably said to him, sleep in the bed, we're not going to do anything. But remember, this was all part of Berlinah's cunning and sly plan to have Mark in the apartment and available for her to attack. It was at about 3 o'clock in the morning the next day, the 23rd of September, when Mark was awoken. He only had his boxer shorts on, and Berlinah woke him up. He said that she stood over him, began crazily laughing, and she said to him, "If I cannot have you, no one can." And Mark was still trying to get his head around what's going on, and he saw her throw a glass of something onto his body. It looked like water. He thought she was going to throw him with water, but she threw it into his face, over his body, and the effect was instant and horrific. This is as strong as battery acid. Immediately began to burn Mark's skin and eyes, and the doctors later described it as this would be excruciating pain within seconds. Now, I have to say that this is disturbing, so if you are triggered by viciousness of human beings to another, then just skip ahead on this part. But Mark jumped out of bed. He didn't know what happened. He was screaming in agony. He wanted to run out of the flat, but he couldn't. But he started to get out. And the neighbors also woke up from the screams. They said they heard a terrifying scream and saw Mark running into the streets, only wearing his boxer shorts. Now, some of the neighbors said the steam was coming off of Mark's skin. His skin was peeling off. He was grey. It looked like his skin color had completely changed. He was shouting, "Help me, help me, I'm going to die." And a neighbor called the 999 number, and doing something that I don't think is the right thing to do, they started hosing him off with water while waiting for the ambulance, thinking that this could help. Meanwhile, Berlinah is in the flat, and she did not call an ambulance. What she did is she went to sit on the sofa and dialed the number of an ex-boyfriend, just talking to him. The boyfriend could hear the cries from the street, asking her what's wrong. And she just said, "Oh, no, it's some guy shouting in the streets." That is Berlinah Wallace's immediate reaction after throwing a glass of sulfuric acid onto her boyfriend. When police arrived and went into the flat, she was still very calm and composed on the sofa, and she even showed them, "Oh, there's the rest of the acid." She immediately started to lie about what happened. And this is where that news article comes in that she read about. She said, "Oh, Mark gave me the glass, and he said, drink some of this water." And she says when she put the glass to her mouth, she realized it's acid and she threw it at him. So this was the first of many lies that Berlinah told. The emergency people were so shocked when they found Mark in a desperate state on the pavement outside. He had severe chemical burns across his face, his chest, his abdomen, his arms, and his thighs. They say he was frothing at the mouth and he could barely speak. He repeatedly said that he couldn't see, and he kept asking, "Do I still have eyes? Do I still have eyes?" Because the acid had burned away his eyelids. It was horrendous. The first responders took him to the hospital, to Southmead Hospital, where they specialize in burn victims. The doctors were so alarmed by the extent of Mark's injuries that the one doctor said that he had never seen a patient with such extensive injuries following a chemical attack. And keep in mind, this is a hospital that specializes in burn injuries, and they had never seen it up until that evening. The hospital wanted to induce a coma immediately to give Mark's organs a chance to survive. But the police was also running against the clock, and they wanted to know who did this to Mark. They wanted to get a statement, but Mark could not talk. He was in indescribable pain. This was a death sentence to Mark. Somehow they got tiles, letters together. I'm imagining it could be something like a board game type of letters, and they put it on a board, and he actually moved the letters around with his tongue to spell Berlinah. His father was there, the doctors were there, and the police were there. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that Berlinah Wallace was responsible for this attack. Mark van Dongen's injuries were catastrophic and ultimately untreatable. Remember how we read earlier that the deeper the acid goes into your soft tissue, the more damage it can cause? Now this is what happened to Mark. The sulfuric acid permanently disfigured him. permanently disabled him. Among the key injuries of this attack was he had severe burns. The acid caused deep, full thickness burns over 25% of Mark's body. 2/3 of his face was burned, along with large portions of his neck, chest, arms, and upper thighs. The burns penetrated through his skin, his tissue, and in some of his bones. Some places over his body even exposed bones. That is how the acid had burned through his skin. Surgeons had to perform dozens of operations, skin transplants. It was horrific. And even after all of these operations, over 40% of his body was left covered in scar tissue. A burn specialist testified in the court case to say that without equivalent in the UK, this was the worst injuries they had ever seen. Mark lost sight in his left eye. He suffered severe damage to his right eye, so he was effectively blind. Even months later, he was unsure if he had eyes due to the damage. Due to the acid and the infections, Mark's lower left leg had to be amputated below the knee. The acid had damaged the blood supply in the tissue and the limb below. It was beyond repair, and he was left with one leg confined to a hospital bed or a wheelchair. Most devastating, Mark became paralyzed from the neck down. While in intensive care, he developed critical inner illness neuropathy, which is a nerve and muscle damage condition common after severe trauma and prolonged ICU stays. And by the time he was stabilized, he had lost the use of all his limbs. Mark would never be able to walk or even move his arms again, and the doctors confirmed that this paralysis was permanent. Mark endured recurring lung infections, pneumonia, he had septic shocks, he had kidney damage, he required dialysis, he had internal bleeding, and all other organs had issues. He required a ventilator to breathe for an extended period, and he was on the strongest painkillers just to manage his pain. So in other words, the acid did not only damage him while he was attacked, it continued to eat into his tissue for days on end. It caused never-ending agony. And for the first month after the attack, Mark was in a coma, and he was tube-fed during this period. When he was initially brought out of this coma, his only way of communication was he used the alphabet board and by sliding the words with his tongue. By 2016, the doctors had developed a speaking valve for Mark, and he now had limited capacity to at least communicate with his father and his loved ones. Although it was a very soft and raspy voice, this was a big victory, I believe, in his recovery. Now, unsurprisingly, Mark suffered tremendous psychological trauma and depression because of this horrific thing that had happened to him, and he felt that he was trapped in a ruined body. He had waves of depression, and he said to his father that he would rather be dead than live in a body that he was living in. After 15 months of being in a 4-month coma, of undergoing a lot of operations, surgeries, and a lot of treatments, everything that this man went through, the doctors felt that Mark can now be moved to a care facility with a little bit less medical attention. It was still according to protocol, but the move from the hospital to the care home was very traumatic. Something terrible happened there. You can go and read about it. I don't want to cover it in this video, but that was the last straw for Mark's father. He was called Kees van Dongen, and he decided that this is just enough. He made plans. He didn't mention it because according to the process in the UK, Mark had to live at this care facility, but Kees arranged private medical transport to take Mark to Belgium. Kees lived in Belgium. That was reason number one. But also in Belgium, euthanasia is legal. People called it that Kees had kidnapped his son. Kees said, I had rescued my son. Eventually, the outcome was that Kees had put his son in a better care facility in Belgium, closer to where Kees was staying. In Belgium, the doctors was just as shocked at Mark's condition. They also continued with the medical care that he needed, but in December 2016, his health took a turn for the worst. He got a serious lung infection, and they had to do a surgical airway. I don't know how to pronounce this, but it's a tracheotomy. That's when they cut your throat basically and put a pipe in there for you to breathe. But that would mean that Mark's only way of communication would be taken from him. And for Mark, this was one of his very last connections to the outside life. They did that to save his life, but for Mark, this was the final chapter. And he decided that he is not going to continue living in this unbearable physical and psychological suffering. And he heard every day that all the doctors and medical professionals and specialists said that this is how you're going to live. There is no way that you are going to recover from this. So Mark and his father formally applied under Belgium law for euthanasia, and after evaluating Mark's case, 3 consultants does that. Looks like that's the procedure. He met all the legal criteria. His condition is incurable. He's got constant suffering, and there was no hope of improvement, and he was approved for euthanasia. And so on the 2nd of January 2017, Mark van Dongen's life was ended by voluntary euthanasia at a Belgium hospital. He was only 29 years old. Mark's father, Kees, had said that his son had faced his end with a measure of acceptance, and that Mark was in a quite positive way on his final day. He wanted his father to stay with him, and his father was by his side the whole time. I think that must be the most difficult thing a parent must be able to do. At about 7:15 in the evening, after confirming that Mark himself wanted to end his life, a Belgian doctor administered a lethal injection as his father held his hand. Mark's ordeal was over, and the Van Dongen family was grief-stricken because this was not supposed to happen to their son. They were now even more determined to seek justice for what they coined a sadistic and evil attack that had destroyed their son's life. Now let's have a look at the criminal charges and the investigation that followed up after the attack. Now, Berlinah was the main suspect to start with, and the evidence mounted up very quickly. They found that she logged into her own Amazon account to buy the sulfuric acid. She had deleted a lot of web searches, and she had viewed horrific graphic photos of acid attack victims. She had a lot of articles that she read on it. All of these things just showed her clear premeditation. Police tested the bottle that they found at her flat, and it was proven to be the 98% pure sulfuric acid. And she could not explain why she had taken the label off. She acknowledged that yes, she knew it was very dangerous, but she just never could explain why she took the label off. And she was then arrested on the 23rd of September 2015, so the same day that the attack actually took place. They charged her initially with grievous bodily harm with intent because Mark was still alive. However, and this is also why the case became so well known, is that after Mark's passing in 2017, prosecutors took the step, which was never taken before, to charge Berlinah with murder on the theory that her actions led directly to Mark van Dongen's death. Now, this was a legally unprecedented case because Berlinah attacked Mark, yet the victim had eventually died by euthanasia and in another country. So the prosecutor had their work cut out for them, and they actually laid out the whole chain of events that eventually ended at the day of Mark's death. All of those decisions, the actions, the infections, the everything that happened to Mark started when Berlinah threw him with the sulfuric acid. They linked that acid attack to the euthanasia. Now, Berlinah's defense team was obviously thinking this doesn't make sense, and they argued that it was Mark's decision to die and that the Belgian doctors had killed him, if we want to use the word kill. And they said that the interventions between the 23rd of September up until 2nd of January 2017, those individual interventions led up to Mark's death, not Berlinah's attack. That was a very interesting scenario, and it was not debated before, and it raised complex questions about what is the criminal's liability when the victim chooses to have their life ended by a third party. The first attempt at a charge of murder was thrown out of court. Mrs. Justice May felt that there was a distinct gap between the action of Berlinah and the day that Mark had died, and she felt that there wasn't enough proof given. It's just as well that Berlinah had killed Mark. So the prosecution was very upset and they immediately appealed, and the appellate court then said that no, Berlinah should be held accountable for murder. And this was also a precedented case that a new jury was selected and she was then charged with murder. The Berlinah that she is did not in the meantime say, I'm so sorry, I feel remorse, I shouldn't have done this is horrible, I feel sorry for Mark's family. She continued lying and telling the story that Mark wanted to trick her into drinking the acid, and that was just simply not true. There was no evidence about that. She also started a smear campaign of Mark, saying that he was the abusive one and that everything that he had told people she had done, that he had actually done that. Now, the police had to investigate, and they found zero evidence that Mark was in the slightest intent abusive. A lot of stories about how scared he was of Berlinah, but no evidence that Mark had ever abused anyone in his life. The police and the prosecutors described Berlinah as a manipulative perpetrator of sustained domestic abuse, and that she was not a victim. The lead investigator, Inspector Paul Catton, later said that Wallace is undoubtedly a manipulative individual who abused Mark throughout their relationship. So it was clear to the police and to the prosecutors that they were dealing with an unusually cruel and remorseless criminal. Berlinah's second trial started in April 2018, and it was held at the Bristol Crown Court. And because of the first, would I say, confusion about the charges, the prosecutor this time asked the jury to consider 3 possible charges. They asked for murder or manslaughter, or the lesser offense of applying a corrosive fluid with intent. So that is also an actual act in the UK. Berlinah was 48 years old by this time, pleaded not guilty, and she continued to insist that Mark's injuries were of his own doing. Can you believe that? During the trial, the prosecutors had again laid out the meticulous way that she planned it, the previous incident of the tea throwing, and the friends, the colleagues, everyone who said that he was the scared one. And then, heartbreaking, Mark's father, Kees, testified about the 15 months of agony and hell that he went through by his son's side. He talked about the day that Mark's life had ended, and I think they needed to hear all of that information to understand what this victim went through. The prosecutor had called witnesses that were there that morning, people that saw Mark right after the attack. They described his screams, his injuries. The one neighbor said about how he saw Mark's skin coming off. The first responders and doctors detailed the injuries, and then the boyfriend that Berlinah had called, the ex-boyfriend, while she was on the couch, who could hear Mark's screams. He asked her what was going on, and she wouldn't say, but eventually she said to him with no ounce of remorse in her voice that, "I have done something terrible." And that was it. So she had zero remorse for what she had done. Surprisingly, Berlinah took the stand in her own defense, and over 3 days she portrayed this poor abused victim that said that Mark had abused her, that Mark was the jealous one, Mark had controlled her, and Mark wanted her dead. And she stuck by the story that Mark had put the acid in a glass and pretended that it was water and gave it to her to drink as if to trick her. She apparently, I don't have the specific wording of this, but she apparently said how difficult it was to grow up in South Africa, about the many amount of times that she was abused here in South Africa before going to the UK, about how it was this horrific history in South Africa and the men that attacked her that gave her HIV and that put her back in life. So she was the victim in all sense of the word, and she did say that the regret she has was having fights with Mark, but that she had never hurt him, and that's the only regret she has with their relationship. The case then eventually were given over to the jury to decide whether it's murder, manslaughter, or injury by the corrosive agent. And over 2 days they deliberated, and they returned with a verdict on the 17th of May 2018. Berlinah was not found guilty of murder and manslaughter, because they found that Mark's euthanasia cannot be legally ruled a homicide by Berlinah under the standards of causation. But they found her guilty of throwing a corrosive substance with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. So yes, they believed that she attacked him, but that she was not responsible for his murder in this sense. Berlinah reportedly didn't show a lot of emotion when the verdict was read, but that to me is not a lot of measurement, because I know a lot of judges or whatever the title is in the country where it happens, tell the people not to show emotion. But Mark's family said that they were relieved that she was convicted, but they still felt that she was responsible for the death of their son, and that it would have been good for them if she was found guilty of the higher charge, if I can put it this way. In the UK, you can be given a life sentence for throwing a corrosive fluid, especially in terms of the harm that you have caused. I think the family was waiting to see what was the judgment going to be in terms of her penalty. His father, Keir, spoke to the media. Everybody, they said that the whole country was keeping their breaths to hear what's going to happen to this woman that ultimately killed this young man. And the sentencing then came on the 23rd of May 2018. From what I can read, Mrs. Justice Nicola Davies, who presided over the case, was very, very vocal in what she thought of Berlinah Wallace. She sounded to me like she was very angry because she had described Berlinah as sadistic, malicious and callous. She said that she had portrayed an act of pure evil that was motivated by jealousy, and she said that your motive was to burn, disfigure and disable Mark van Dongen so that he would not be attractive to any other woman. She also emphasized, the judge, how vulnerable Mark was. He was sleeping, he didn't have clothes on except for his boxers, and that Berlinah was waiting for him when he was the least able to fight back. So she also condemned Berlinah's actions after the attack. She didn't try to help him. She launched a smear campaign to say that Mark was the abuser. So she also said that she does not believe anything Berlinah is saying, and that Mark in no way would ever have hurt Berlinah, that he was terrified of her, and Mark had lied about. We all now know that Berlinah had also committed it. So she said that in the court for everybody to know that, for the record, Berlinah did this as well. She referred back to the documented acknowledgement of Berlinah to say to the counsellor that I feel that I can kill him. So she said that there's no guidelines that would fully cover what Berlinah has done. And she said that Berlinah is dangerous in the legal sense of the word, and therefore a life term was warranted. But she was given a life imprisonment with a minimum of 12 years before Berlinah can apply for parole. Now, it means that she could be in her early 60s when she can be released, and that is also if the parole board sees her that she's not a danger. 2 years were deducted of this 12 years because she was in jail for 2 years. The punishment made headlines because it was the first ever life sentence that was given for an acid attack in the UK. Now, in the words of the trial judge, she ended off by saying, "You planned and executed an act of unthinkable cruelty. You showed no remorse. Your victim was a gentle, caring man who did not deserve any of what you did to him. It was an act of pure evil." I tried to find out if Berlinah was still in jail in the UK, because that was one of the concerns of the subscriber who recommended this video, that she said that it could be that Berlinah is no longer in jail. That would be shocking and sad. If you know whether Berlinah is still in jail, please let us know in the comments. Just interesting to know. It's a terribly, terribly sad to me. I always think about how in love people are. They would literally die for the other one, and that you get to a point that you are so enraged and jealous that you kill that other person. I think Berlinah knew that Mark could die of the acid attack. I really don't think she only wanted to disfigure him. I think she didn't want him there. There were so many red flags. We know those red flags. Those red flags are not even hidden anymore. This person threw this man with hot boiling water. And he realized that my life is now in danger. Please, if you are attacked, if you are beaten, if you are pushed, if you are given any sign that your life is in danger or that this will be escalating, get out of that relationship. Whether you are the man or the lady, we sometimes think that men cannot be abused, yet it happens every day. So this video is to both people in a relationship. Don't stay there if you are being abused. So yes, she made him stay with all her threats of harming herself. He loved her. He didn't want people to think bad of her. And he was just generally a nice, pleasant guy. Tell me what you think of this case. To me, this is just next level evil. I would love to know what your thoughts are on this. Please remember to subscribe if you haven't yet. And I want to give a special thank you to Justin Chambly. He's one of the most active subscribers on the channel. Thank you so much. And Justin has sent me a very interesting case that I will be covering in the weeks to come. And then secondly, thank you so much to my editor. You are brilliant. I really appreciate it. So I give all of this information and she makes it look so beautiful. So I hope you have enjoyed this video and let me know what you think of this case. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.